Behavioral Grooves Podcast. My name is Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. We interview interesting people in order to unlock insights into behavioral science and how we can apply those to work and life.
In this episode, we talked with Kal Turnbull, founder of the Change My View community on Reddit that has over 500,000 subscribers. For those of you who don't know, Change My View is a forum where participants post a topic or viewpoint with the purpose of understanding the opposing viewpoints that they can get. Users submit posts containing an opinion of theirs, and respondents attempt to change the poster's view on that matter. Wired magazine ran a story highlighting this group and called it our best hope for civil discourse online.
Yeah, Elon Musk even called Change My View the most civil place on the web. You know what else is amazing, Kurt?
No.
Kal was only 17 when he founded the forum.
That's pretty cool. And it makes me wonder what the hell I was doing when I was 17.
Yeah, what the hell were you doing when you were 17?
Pretty sure I wasn't changing the world. That's for sure.
Well, in our conversation, we covered a lot of ground from Fisking. No, it's not dirty, but you'll have to listen to the podcast to find out to why he started Change My View and some of his thoughts on what the most effective ways that he sees people changing their views. It's really, really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and I loved his quote from his granddad. Again, you're going to have to listen to the conversation to hear the full thing, but it just might change your view on how you think about first judgments and facts and figures.
Absolutely. Well, of course, we talked about music and we had a lot of fun. We heard from what Kal's reading now. It was a really good conversation.
Yeah, so listen up, and we hope you enjoy this episode of Behavior Grooves as much as we did.
Kal Turnbull, welcome to the Behavioral Grooves Podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
We are excited. This is a treat for us as we're talking with somebody who's actually going out and changing the world. And that's what we like to think we're helping people do, but you're actually doing it. So we're excited here.
We really are.
Very flattering. Thank you.
So we'd like to get our brains limbered up a little bit with a speed round. So if that's okay, we're just going to zip through a couple of speed questions here.
Okay.
Monet or Michelangelo?
Oh, Michelangelo.
Okay.
Dog or cat?
Dog.
Dog.
Bicycle or unicycle?
Bicycle.
Fisking, good or bad?
Depends.
Oh.
If I had to choose.
I think you're gonna Well, actually, let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I think we need to. A little explanation for the listeners about what fisking is, and then we can talk a little bit more about why sometimes it might be good and sometimes why not.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Fisking is something that I learned about recently, and it was brought to my attention by a post in the subreddit Change My View, and basically it's a method of dissecting someone's argument and responding to it point by point, and it's a slang term named after a British journalist, Robert Fisk, and basically the reason why I said it depends is because I believe it has its use. It's very good it's very good for when you want to make sure you're not getting someone wrong. You're not putting words in their mouth, and so you're taking a whole comment or blog post or article or something, and you're responding point by point, and you're basically saying, this is what I've read and this is how I'm responding. However, I do think as the user who wrote that blog post on changemyview.net and also their CMV post, as they pointed out, I think sometimes it can get a bit lost and you end up getting down this rabbit hole of point to point, and you're not having a conversation. You're not actually talking to each other on a human level. So yeah, their question was, should I take a more narrative approach, actually talk to them? And I guess the conclusion was it depends.
Yeah. And to that point, I read that blog post. I thought it was fascinating. So anybody who is listening to this, I urge you to go out and look that up because it was really well done. And there's that emotional level of the narrative that I think disappears when you start fisking, right? Because then it becomes point by point counter argument, and you're getting down into the weeds of semantics as opposed to what's the underlying components there. So
yeah, absolutely. And it kind of, in that sense goes against the very nature of Change My View, which is about conversation, etc., and actually trying to understand and talk to people. So yeah.
So how did you found Change My View? What was the catalyst for creating it?
Yeah, so I've been asked this quite a few times, as you can imagine, and sometimes it can be quite tricky to get it across. And so the kind of long form nature of this is nice, because it's a mixture of things, really, and it all kind of came about in one night and built up into this kind of just moment of wanting to find it, and I couldn't find it, so I made it. But the actual motivation, yeah. So I think that's probably quite common for when things are made. Really, you try to find it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a mixture of things. So one of them was that I was preparing to go off to university. So and that kind of brings about a reflective kind of mood where I was thinking across my past and friends and family, and how really in our own little bubble, in a small Scottish town, we all really, in the grand scheme of things, think quite similarly. And with that, I was thinking I'm going off to university in a city and meeting new people and of different backgrounds and cultures, and so I was aware of this like kind of change that was about to happen, and of the conversations that might come about. Also, I was kind of thinking there was a couple of views that were just really insignificant, and honestly, I can't remember them now. But I was kind of thinking, it would be nice to maybe hear other sides of this. Where do I go for that? And also another element which I don't tend to talk about so much, I've kind of skirted around, I guess, is let's put it this way: my father wasn't the best at hearing other people. Right. So,
yeah,
we know there are very many people out there in the world that sometimes are really dig into their viewpoint. So
yeah. And so all of this together kind of made me think, where do you go when you have a view that either you want changed because there are views that perhaps people don't want to have, or you're interested in seeing if it can be changed? And I really struggled to think where you could go if you can't do it in real life, and not everyone has the luxury to do this in real life. Maybe they just don't know anybody, or the people around them aren't good for it. So, and as I started looking into it, the typical social media just didn't work. I don't think so. Reddit kind of came to my mind, and so that's where I went looking.
But you didn't find anything, so you created it.
Yes. So I guess anyone who's familiar with Reddit will know that if you want to find a subreddit, you just type it in the search bar. So reddit.com/r/something, which is easy for many hobbies and things, interests. You can just type it in, kind of guess, and you'll probably find it. For this idea, it was a bit more complicated what it would be called. I wasn't totally sure. And my instinct was to type in "change my mind," which was taken. But it was taken by one of the thousands and thousands of what we call dead subreddits, so no subscribers and no active moderators. And so I had to think of a different name, and that's when "Change My View" came to my mind. And it wasn't there, so I made it. And I often say to people now that in hindsight, I'm so glad that "Change My Mind" wasn't available.
Yes.
And it's become actually vital to the underlying philosophy that we treat these things as views, just the way we see things, as opposed to our own minds and identities.
Yeah, I think that's a really good differentiation point there, because you're really looking at this as the viewpoints that you're doing. So you started this how many years ago, and it's taken off? So what do you attribute that success to? I mean, it's sure you've gotten this question a ton as well. So,
well, part of it was due to the free time I had at school.
Okay.
So,
Great.
I basically, when I made it, I already had my grades and my offers for uni, so I was kind of just waiting.
Okay.
And so I had a lot of free time. But I do think that it was also just this kind of obsessiveness to make it work, because I really felt it was needed. So it was a mixture of those two things. Everything just aligned very well for me in that first year of Change My View, which is probably the most important year for a subreddit, because I always think of it as like a snowball you're rolling towards the edge of a hill. It eventually picks up and takes off by itself, but you really have to push it for a long time. And if you stop, then it will just die. Any form of a community that you're building will just die off. So after that initial period of plugging it around Reddit and trying to get people to take part, I would say the thing that's just made it grow and grow is the recognition from other people of the benefit of this type of space and the severe lack of it elsewhere. And so, past that initial phase, obviously we've got a team of moderators that work very hard to maintain the quality, but I do think that to some extent it's out of our hands in terms of the attraction.
Well, Elon Musk has called Change My View the most civil place on the web. That sounds like a pretty good endorsement.
Yeah, for sure. And if you read that tweet, there's an element of it that's perhaps a bit critical too, because I believe it says that if only more people who actually should change their minds would use it, or something like that. And yes. And yeah, that's true. There is an element of Change My View is, I agree with them essentially, though of course for what it is, maybe there's probably more civil places that are less kind of, they're not talking about big political issues, but for what it is, I agree. And but to his actual point that perhaps it's not always used by people who need it, well, that's fair, but all we claim to be is a service for people who need it.
Right. Well, and I think to the point, one of the probably values of this is that the people who are searching it out are people who are open to that component, right? Of having a view challenged and examined in more detail. As we all know people who aren't there, right? And so it's not going to work on them, even if you did offer it up to them, because they're going to be ironclad in their views.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you couldn't force someone to use Change My View.
Yeah.
So what are the big when you look at the overall arc of Change My View, are there more common topics than others, and what are those? What are the most common people who are willing to come in and say, I'm willing to have my view changed on this? Yeah,
topics come and go. I'd say that Change My View definitely reflects the kind of hot topics of the world. So at the moment, we are going through a gun reform and gun issue phase. Of course, we went through just a general Donald Trump election phase for a long time, the end of 2016. And before that, there was none that really stood out to me as like phases as such, but just whenever there's an event or something of some kind, it tends to come up in the subreddit. It's a tricky question though to answer in terms of what are people most willing to have their views changed about, etc. It's just because we take so many views of a different nature that it's a hard question to answer, because we like to put across the idea that we aren't a political subreddit by design. We are for any views of any kind. So you can talk about your opinion on a movie you saw or something. It doesn't have to be these deeply political issues, but of course you can't avoid them.
Yeah. I mean, I noticed there was one on I'm not a fan of abstract art. So can you convince me that abstract art is a good thing? And,
yeah.
So
that sounds quite tricky on the surface, doesn't it?
That's Picasso or Michelangelo, and there you go. So Kal, in your experience, are there certain factors that you see are more effective in getting people to change their view? I mean, when you see these happening and you get the delta that comes up, are there things that people are doing more effectively than others, in other words, when they're responding to these questions?
Yeah, I'd say so. And we've had a few research papers on this that kind of back it up a little bit too. So for a while, this was just on my gut feeling, but it's nice to see that it's been somewhat affirmed. I'd say it can be quite basic as just the general tone of your approach.
Okay.
Whether you're treating the chance to change someone's view as a chance to try and connect with that person, as opposed to try and shame them. You know, I think a lot of people have this habit of aggression, or appealing to the crowd or whoever might be listening, instead of trying to connect. So it's very basic, but I do see that the people who succeed the most are the ones that kind of put everything else aside and just, get down to it. I try and pick it apart in a dispassionate way, I'd say. But of course, there are times where passion can help. It's hard to generalize these things.
Okay.
But also just actually asking questions as opposed to just jumping straight in with facts and data and references and all sorts of things. So something you'll hear quite a lot about is the backfire effect. And
Yep.
quite often people try and use this backfire effect in a way to kind of not slander, but argue against the usefulness of change my view, because they hear about this thing where, well, when you show someone good evidence, they're more likely to double down. So through that, aren't you kind of fighting a losing battle? Well, I'd say that there's a distinction to be made in the backfire effect, and that is that essentially copy pasting a wall of resources isn't talking to somebody.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where that's just my opinion on why that doesn't always work, is that you're not actually connecting to them. You're not appealing to maybe some of their nature. You're just treating them as an object, like any other person who might think the same thing, and you're throwing stuff at them.
Yeah. So you said asking questions. Are those questions around understanding why people are holding that view, or is it more on clarifying the pieces that they're trying to, the concept that's going on? I don't know if that's a very clear distinction.
Yeah. So clarifying questions are important, for sure. So just making sure you understand what they're saying. But the kind of general Socratic method of getting them to answer questions relating to the view, from what I've seen, can actually lead to a view change purely through questioning.
Oh, okay.
It's not something I've been able to do successfully, but the ones that do it the best, just purely through questioning, can lead to contradictory answers that open up their eyes on their own.
Yeah.
And I from what I've seen, this can be like a really nice way of changing someone's view, because they feel part of it. They feel like they've done it themselves through recognizing their own contradictions.
What do you think is the connection between changing someone's view and changing someone's behavior?
Yeah, so absolutely, views can lead to behavior. So the way you see things can affect how you treat other people or behave in the world. However, that kind of, to some extent, contradicts what we are trying to say to people, and that is that views aren't who you are. So try to detach from them, etc. Views can become who you are, of course, if you let them take over your life. And so just, I guess my answer is, views and behavior are related if you allow it to take over. I do see people in the subreddit who they kind of confess to having views, and I don't believe they necessarily let it affect them. They just happen to think that way. If you know what I mean.
Yeah. Interesting. So you're well read. What are the authors or thought leaders that have influenced you the most?
So this is an interesting question, because I've found myself in this position, not as someone who is particularly skilled or knowledgeable about any of these things. I just felt like there was a severe lack of good quality conversation, etc. And I went off to uni to study civil engineering, and so now I'm kind of thinking my interests all along have been elsewhere. And so I've realized I have to start reading a bit more. And I'm currently in the middle of The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt.
Oh, excellent.
Which is a good book from what I can see. I've not finished it yet. But in terms of thought leaders and etc. that might have influenced me, well, again, it's a tricky question because I don't have a really particularly good answer for that. But I do admit that some aspects of Joe Rogan have appealed to me recently. I think he's a very open-minded person that has a lot of a wide range of guests from different backgrounds. And I haven't delved too far into his videos, but he strikes me as someone who thinks a lot, and I appreciate any kind of cases of that today. Another example might be Russell Brand, although with a pinch of salt.
I am unfamiliar with Russell Brown. Who is Russell Brown?
Russell Brand.
Oh, man.
Yeah, actor, activist, character.
I mean, I think I'm not saying I necessarily align with these people in particular ways. It's just I appreciate their way of thinking and talking and all sorts, and I think that they are kind of to some extent what we're about. And their openness.
Well, I will tell you, just in the little bit of Joe Rogan that I've seen, I remember one specific issue in one of his podcasts where he was presented with evidence that was counter to what his belief had been prior, and he literally changed his view on air as he was going around. He said, I used to think this, but it doesn't seem like that's right, and so I need to... and he said he was going to investigate it more. But that type of mindset, I think, is what I'm hearing you're appreciating and kind of wanting to replicate, and has an influence to you.
Yeah, and a security in yourself to not be ashamed of being wrong as well, and to not see it as a defeat, which I think Joe Rogan, he has that about him. He doesn't see these things as defeats. He sees them as chances to learn and to lose a bit of ignorance. So
Jonathan Haidt is very much the same way. I mean, he acknowledged that when he started writing the book, he considered himself a very, very liberal guy, and that as he spent more time looking at the differences and the similarities between especially the way sort of right-leaning and left-leaning people act and how they express themselves and the things that they hold dear, he started to move more to the right as he continued to write the book. And it was the first time I'd read that was an important book in my own journey, Kal, because that was the first time that an author really introduced really academic and clinical approaches to the way that we think, that wasn't all full of, passion and hyperbole and, exaggeration. It was really just very focused. I think I'd recommend it to anybody. Yeah. Actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm looking forward to getting more into it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I hope you enjoy it.
It's interesting how you're talking. I've done some work on self-identity and self-schemas and various different things. And so the interesting part about that is that oftentimes we as humans, when we face, that we have an identity about who we are, the beliefs that we hold, our values, all those viewpoints that we have, and that forms the picture in our head of who we are. And when we get disconfirming evidence, right? So I'm an active guy going out and, I'm exercising, I'm a big exercise, athlete. But then I keep realizing, I come home from work and I sit on the couch every night and I'm not out running. I'm not going to the gym. I'm not doing that. And there's, oftentimes we either discount that information, but put it aside somehow, where we're saying, all right, well, that's just it's just this last couple weeks I've been under too much stress, or yeah, it's been too cold out. You're making excuses for why you're not doing it, and it's really hard for people to face the fact that maybe I'm not as athletic as I think I am, and I might need to actually change my viewpoint on who I am. And so I don't know if there was a question in there. But.
Well, what I wonder is, what is it that gets people to be willing to change their view on something like Brexit or Donald Trump or guns or anything like that? Do you have any insights into what gets people to be willing to?
Yeah. So, and to go back to that earlier point you were making about kind of ignoring things, I find that was very relevant to our Delta system, actually, first of all, because it comes from a place, it came from a conversation I had with another moderator who was talking about this idea that we're very bad at remembering we were wrong about something. So we absorb a view change and carry on as if we've always been right.
Yes.
And so the Delta exists to force us to acknowledge that change. The act of giving a delta is kind of sticks in the mind a bit more, and also you get your own delta history as well, so you can look back at the times where you were wrong. So I just thought that was interesting and relevant. But what gets people to change their views? Well, I mean, that's the huge question, isn't it? That's what it's all about. I mean, I think it depends on the person. So whether you're appealing to their experiences and their own biases, you can actually maybe frame something in a way that they didn't realize was aligned with them. You can actually turn it back on them. But also, I do believe there are people out there who will change their views when presented with evidence. Those people do exist, I think. In fact, that reminds me of, I recently came across a quote that my granddad showed me, and I thought it was very relevant. And it was the idea that one begins with a judgment and ends with a judgment. And the purpose of facts and figures is to come in between and make the one you end with more accurate. And this is an idea that I think is getting lost. And I think people are getting stuck on their first judgment.
Yes.
They're not interested in acknowledging that first judgment is just, a kind of preliminary view on what's happening. It's not the final idea. So that's not coming through very well today, I don't think. But I do think those people exist, so credit to them. Other people, I think they just need experiences. They just need to be thrown into an experience that changes their view. I mean, they just can't. They can't help but acknowledge they were wrong. So maybe an example of that would be, you hear about these ex-KKK members, etc. They've been kind of forced through their experiences of meeting certain people to just change their ways. You might not have been able to talk them out of it on an online forum, perhaps.
Right.
Yeah. I honestly, I can't imagine some of that.
Well, and there was and I can't remember if it was Adam Grant or somebody else, but was just talking to your point about the judgment, and then starting with the judgment and ending in the rule of facts and data to make that last judgment better. But they were saying too often we get stuck on the first idea that pops in our head, the first belief that we hold, and because of the way that our mind works, we tend to try to make that confirmation bias of, all right, so everything that comes in that now agrees with that, I will take in, versus, the disconfirming evidence, I kind of either ignore or discount in some way. And in reality, that first one is usually not the best by any means. And the research has shown that when they're just given, doing different things. I have to look that up and we can put it in the post. So. Much
like in brainstorming, I seem to be running into all sorts of things that are confirming a new view that I have on brainstorming, and that is more is better. That the first idea that you have is almost never going to be the best.
Yeah.
It just can't. So why would we think the same of our opinions?
Yeah.
We just come to an opinion quickly and easily. It's probably not the best articulate. It's probably not the best view that it can be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think another thing that perhaps we're forgetting is that we don't always need to have a view on things.
That's a radical thought, Kal.
I do find myself sometimes like just I like to make a habit of acknowledging when, I don't have a view on this. I don't need to have a view on this, because I think perhaps people sometimes they just get too caught up in always needing to say something about something. So perhaps you're not in a position to be the one that this is important to, or this is relevant to talk about with, so of course there are global issues that everyone should have opinions on too. So
yeah. I'd like to, if it's okay with Kurt, I'd like to change a little bit, because you're a musician, and this is the Behavioral Grooves podcast.
Yeah.
So we do like to talk a little bit about music.
Tim likes to talk a lot about music.
Okay.
But let's just get this right. I like music. I'm just it's not the passion. Maybe I should go out to, change my view and put a question out there about how can I, work with my partner here who's so passionate about this. I need to get more passionate. So,
Kal, tell me about what kind of recent music projects are you working on?
Yeah, so I've got a kind of project / band type thing. I mean, it is just me and a friend really, and he doesn't like to perform so much, so it is a recording project at the moment, and it's called the Xenons. And basically, I've got my own home studio and just recording it, and I released an EP last summer, self-recorded. And I'm currently in pre-production and working towards another EP at the moment. It's just something I really like doing. And the recording process, I find most of all, I have played gigs and a couple of festival in the past, and that is like a kind of separate experience to the experience of recording. So they're like different things to me.
Yeah.
And I'm really just
in what way are they different? I mean, how would you describe that?
Yeah. So the performing side of things, the playing to a crowd is like a human kind of interaction type thing, and you're getting lost in the music together kind of thing. Whereas recording is like creating, it's like fine tuning and getting lost in that, adding everything together. And I do recognize now that there are some parallels between my music recording and what changed my view was at the start. I do kind of, I like projects. I like getting stuck in and tweaking and trying to make things grow and work, etc. So I can see kind of the parallel there now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is pretty great. And what about writing? I mean, that's the preamble to the recording and the performance.
Yeah, and when I said recording, I guess I was kind of throwing that all together, because I agree the writing and is a hugely important part, and that part of things I kind of tend to, it comes in phases. It's kind of weird. My writing tends to be when perhaps I'm going through a tougher time, and actually when things are going really well and smooth, I'm not as inspired.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is funny and kind of frustrating.
But you come from a part of the world where there's a lot of poets that did really, really well focusing on their sorrows.
Yeah. So I'm trying to get back into that writing spirit just now. So yeah.
I mean, it's a challenge, right? It really is a challenge to go from an idea into something that is crafted and ready to record. And if you've got a home studio, I can imagine you're and as you said, you're tweaking along the way. So the creative process doesn't end when you say, okay, the song is written. Now the recording process is an additional element of expression of what the song is. I think that's very cool.
Yeah. Right. You can get a bit lost in it sometimes, and it can drive you a bit mad if you let it. But
we like to ask our guests what their theme song is.
Okay, yeah. So
theme song.
I guess this question, you could confuse it for being favorite song sometimes, which isn't necessarily the same thing, is it?
Yeah, that's very true. And I think there's a distinction that people make when we do this. So,
yeah. And if I was to answer the favorite song, I might say something like Ooh La La by the Faces.
Oh, okay.
But in terms of theme song relevant to all of this, I would probably have to go for something a bit obvious and say what's so funny about Peace, Love and Understanding, well, by Elvis Costello and the
that sounds great. Yeah.
Oh, one of my favorites.
Yeah, and Elvis is tremendous. He's a great songwriter.
Yeah. All right. Well, fantastic. Kal, thank you. We appreciate your time. We appreciate the work that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
It really does have an impact, I think, on over 500,000 subscribers? Is that how you
520,000 at the moment? Yeah.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. Yes. So congratulations on that, and really, I think you should be very proud and thankful. We're very thankful for having you taking the time to be with us. So
absolutely. No, thank you for having me on. It's been very interesting.
Welcome to our grooving session, where Tim and I groove on what we learned from our Behavioral Grooves interview, have a free-flowing discussion on some of those topics, and whatever else comes into our heads, which for Tim is usually music.
Hell yes. So, Kurt, what about Kal's granddad's comment?
I like how you said it with the proper Scottish accent, which I cannot do, so I won't even try. Yeah. I won't even try. I'd end up saying it with a southern granddad southern accent.
That works too.
No, I should try to stay away from accents. Yes, I loved it. So one begins with a judgment and ends with a judgment. And the purpose of facts and figures is to come in between and make the one you end with more accurate.
Yeah, that's fabulous, isn't it?
It's just a beautiful quote. B, I love that Kal took it to the spot, and he talked about how we tend to hold on to our first judgments much stronger and more than we really should.
Yeah, it gets back to a discussion we had with James Heyman about brainstorming, where James says, "What's the if of all the ideas that could be shouted out, what's the likelihood that the very first one is going to be a winner?" Right? And yet our brains latch onto that first idea so easily, right?
Yeah.
We just say, "Oh, well, that was the first one," and just out of sheer cognitive laziness, we're like, that's what I'm going with.
Right, and there's so many biases and so many heuristics that we have as people, right? It's part of our human nature that happens. And even though you and I know this stuff, we understand it, I fall myself falling into the trap all the time. For instance, I was just reading on the behavioral scientists site some research that they did on Head Start. And I had always believed Head Start had all this research and all this stuff done to it. And they were actually saying, of the billions of dollars that we've spent on that over the years, the long-term impact of Head Start is negligible, if anything.
And so for listeners that aren't familiar with Head Start, Kurt, give us
Head Start is a early childhood development preschool type approach, usually used for underserved or low-income people that they can send their children to a preschool.
It's government sponsored. It was a federal government design.
Yep, and states have run with it. And what they, and I had made the assumption, and I, would argue with some of my right-wing friends about this, really without having any background or any knowledge about the effectiveness of it until I read this. So hopefully I did get some facts and figures in between, and now I have a different viewpoint.
A more accurate view.
A more accurate viewpoint. Yes.
Well, and speaking of which, I liked how Kal talked about how changing other people's minds really kind of boiled down to these three things, right? The tone that you use. You need to use a civil tone to be dispassionate. Right, to actually kind of pull the passion back is a better way of changing someone else's mind. And of course, use data. Mm-hmm. Use accurate data, not fake news data.
But fake news data actually works really well to change somebody's mind,
yes,
right?
It does.
The research that just came out where fake news travels 6 times faster on the internet than actual real news. And, some of the discussion around that were because of the way that fake news, its vividness, and typically it's controversial and has some components that grab onto those emotions, which are those things that get people to share it. So
Yeah.
But to your point, I liked Kal's components about being those 3 components. And he also talked about using the Socratic Method and questioning and using somebody's own answers to really get them to think about how do they really believe, and are there ways that you can point out the discrepancies in one answer to another answer to another answer.
So I was overall just amazed at this idea that we're having this conversation with the guy who's in his early 20s. And we're talking about the Socratic Method, and he sounds like a university scholar.
Yes.
That he has this wisdom about himself that is, and calm demeanor that was just remarkable. I really enjoyed the discussion.
Yeah, he had insights that you would attribute to somebody much older and with many more years experience. And so I give him all the kudos in the world, because I think that's really, really there. I am interested to think about, though, is that method of changing people's minds, is that more relevant or more applicable in the online setting of his Reddit subgroup than potentially in a one-on-one conversation?
That is a really interesting question, because it seems like he was only referencing the experience in Reddit, right, in the Change My View environment, and not really what it's like to be in debate with someone. Although the Fisking model it sounds like a debating model that could apply in human to human interaction, face to face.
Well, and again, to that Fisking model, that the point to point dialogue around each and every point. I do see that is probably a way that we tend to fall into, right? We fall into that method of debate. But I don't think that, as he said, it's not always the most appropriate one, because you're missing the narrative, you're missing the story. And that's where I also think some of the dispassionate component, right? I think maybe there's an element of passion that you really ought to have to try to get somebody to change their viewpoint. I don't know, though. Again, this is where I have an opinion, but I don't have the facts and figures to really, prove it. And so I don't know if I have an accurate end opinion on that.
Right, and our lazy minds just say, well, it's okay for me to have this opinion, regardless of how I got to it. And I thought that Kal's comment of, it's okay to not have a view on everything.
Oh, yes.
Like, we don't have to have a view. It's okay to not have a view.
How can you not have a view in today's world? You have to have a view, no matter if you know nothing about it. Yeah. What's your view on, water rights on Mars?
And I would espouse something, right?
Yes.
I could riff on that without even I don't even know if there is water on Mars. But I could tell you, it's important for us to be thinking about this, and certainly the government shouldn't be involved or should be involved, and we could develop a narrative around it.
We do, right?
Yeah.
We automatically, and I think that's part of the human nature of, we have to feel in control, that sense of control, and when we don't have an opinion, it's kind of, you're out of control.
Oh, what? Okay, so that is worth a podcast right there.
Yeah.
Just on our perceptions of ourselves in perceived control versus real control.
Yeah. Because if you're open to having no opinion, then who's to say that you're going to be swayed by whichever wind comes? And I don't know. There's a lot to probably dissect in that.
That's an interesting thing, because in a public forum, saying I don't have an opinion on this could mean I'm whimsical and I don't really have any convictions. However, it could also say I'm smart enough to know that I'm just not informed enough to really have a view.
Yeah, the Dunning-Kruger effect, right?
Yes,
It's
yes, well done.
I know myself well enough to know that I don't know.
Yes.
So I will be much more readily stating that I don't have an opinion on things from this point forward.
Well, and the Dunning-Kruger effect is also the opposite side, where someone who is not informed is comfortable with the idea of adopting an opinion on it.
Exactly.
I wanted to call attention to something that I really love about Kal's comments when we were talking about books. You know, he's a big fan of Joe Rogan, great. But The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, I thought that was... of course, that sums up Kal right there. This whole idea of Jonathan Haidt going after the question, how do smart people have completely divergent views on things? And this, of course, plays into exactly what Change My View is all about. But I loved that part of our discussion as well.
Yeah, I thought it was right on, and it is on my to-read list now.
Yeah.
So there you go.
I could have brought a copy over, actually, to our behavioral group studio.
Yes, the beautiful studios at Pleasant Avenue.
Yeah.
What did you think about his musical taste?
Well, first of all, it surprised me that he would go to Elvis Costello. Was a delight for me. I'm a fan of Elvis as well, and you are to some degree, right?
Yes, I am. I had one album of his, but "Brilliant Mistake" and "Indoor Fireworks" are two of my favorite songs
it's great
that
stuff.
are on my playlist.
Okay, so what else is on your playlist? What else musically is coming to mind these days?
So I actually wanted to switch this question around.
Okay.
No, it's still around music.
Okay,
it's
all right.
still around music, but there's lots of bands that I have a very eclectic mix. But I was going to take this and look at it from, and you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, but favorite concert or concerts of all time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I have my top 5 list.
Okay.
And can you, I will, we've known each other long enough. We've talked about music enough. Do you have a guess as to what might be my favorite concert of all time? I would tell you it's actually a stadium concert, which is my top 5 is the only one.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, so I would guess Journey.
That was cruel. That was cruel. No, it was not Journey.
No. Okay, so a stadium concert. Give me the era. When did you?
1987.
Oh, so kind of in the era.
Carver Hawkeye Arena, and the Bodines opened up for him.
Okay, now
And it was October 29th.
Wow.
So I can remember this.
Terrific memory on this. No, now I'm thrown off. I'm overthinking.
All right, it was U2 Joshua Tree.
Oh, yes, of course.
And it was just one of those. It was knew every song that they played. We had horrible seats, but the lights went out and we rushed the stage, so we were within 15 feet of the stage on the first level of bleachers. And it was just absolutely fantastic, and I still to this day, have the memory of watching The Edge, up close and playing his guitar and Bono out there.
Isn't that terrific how
making
experiences
his statements of, Bullet the Blue Sky, and that was just a pretty amazing concert. So there you go. So, and we can go into the top 5 of my other concerts at another one of these podcasts.
Okay. So I think, and I've been fortunate to see some really good live music over the years, as well. But I think my favorite concert was the first one that I went to, and this was the summer of 1972. So I was 11 years old. So you don't have to do the math. You don't have to try to figure that out. I'm 57 years old, and I I was learning how to play guitar,
and
acoustic guitar, and one of my favorite groups at the time was a group called America.
Oh yeah,
and they were not coming to the town that I lived in, which was St. Louis, but they were coming close by to Edwardsville, Illinois, to an outdoor amphitheater. And there was this young, scrawny guy named Jackson Brown that was opening for them, and my recollection is that. I was aware of Dr. My Eyes, which was Jackson Brown's first hit, had just been released, and was like, okay, that's fine. I really wanted to see America. And I'd never been to a concert before. At the time, my 20-year-old brother took me because I couldn't drive, and my parents wouldn't let me go to a concert alone.
An 11-year-old? Why?
Well...
Those were the era where you would probably do that.
There are some things that they did let me do. That might have not been such great ideas, but that's later. That's for another discussion as well. And so we sat on the lawn in this amphitheater, and Jackson Brown came out, and it was his original band. It was Elise Sklar on bass, Russ Kunkel on drums, Danny Korchmar on second guitar, and of course he had David Lindley with him playing slide. And I was blown away by the experience of live music. And I thought, wow, this... And he did a 45-minute set that I was completely enamored with. And then thinking, America is going to be even better because they were the reason that I was there. And regrettably, they were so stoned, they got through 3 songs, and literally the road manager came onto the stage and just actually escorted them off the stage. It was hugely disappointing. But I became a Jackson Brown fan because of that experience. Yeah.
I was going to just make a comment that, your first judgment is usually not, but your first concert might be the most memorable concert. I think there's something actually about the first concert aspect of it.
The first and the last, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that's right there. And I almost thought you were going to go like, America was my favorite band, and they weren't coming, but this other band, American, came, and I was gonna, because I had just heard
I didn't fall in love.
There was a post the other day of make sure you read the fine print of this gentleman who really wanted to go see the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and so they weren't coming around him, but they were going somewhere in Scotland or Ireland, and so he bought a ticket and flew over, and he got there, and he said, wow, the ticket was first off, the ticket was really cheap, and then B, when he got there, it was a really super small venue, and there weren't very many people there, and it was the Red Hot Chili Pipers, who were a bagpipe cover band of the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Oh, I've got stories along those lines as well, unfortunately. Yeah, I can relate to that. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up this episode of the Behavioral Grooves podcast. And thank you, Kal, for taking time. And if you enjoyed this, please go out, leave a comment, and give us 5 stars. We would really appreciate it.
Yeah. Right now, the podcast is being listened to in 42 countries. So we just want to encourage everybody to share this with 1 or 2 of your closest friends and let them know that you're having fun listening.
Yeah. So gracias, danke,
and
merci,
all those other
and
things.
all the other ones that I can't pronounce.
Thank you, and we'll see you next time.